The fluorescent lights flicker as my fingers fly over the keyboard. One wrong move, and the system locks me out forever. Nurse Sarah just burst in, her voice sharp with warning. Security knows I stole the files. My only proof is this drive in my pocket, and if they catch me, I disappear into the senator's organ farm. The defibrillator hums in my grip, heavy and desperate. I swing. The guard drops, but the door seals shut behind me. Too late. The hum of the server room vibrated through Caleb Miller's sneakers, a rhythmic pulse against the soles of his feet. Sweat slicked his palms, making the keys slippery as he punched the final sequence into the terminal. On the monitor, the encryption barrier, a jagged wall of crimson code, shattered into a waterfall of emerald text. He exhaled a breath, smelling of stale coffee and adrenaline. The air in this sub-basement of the Sterling Heights Medical Institute was pre-filtered and recycled, stripped of any scent of life or humanity. It felt thin, like the air at high altitudes, leaving a copper taste on his tongue that made every breath feel like sucking on a penny. Caleb leaned closer to the screen, his eyes darting across the directories. He bypassed the supply chains for synthetic skin and titanium joints, clicking instead on a restricted file titled Project Harvest, Prime Candidates. His heart hammered against his ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted the beats to keep his hands from shaking. A high-resolution scan bloomed across the screen. The face staring back possessed his own crooked nose, the same jagged scar bisecting the left eyebrow, and the identical amber flecks in the irises. Below the image, a time-stamped log detailed his last 3 physical exams. Subject 44 Miller. The text read, Genetic purity, 99.8%. Compatibility with Senator Robert Thorne, optimal. Scheduled extraction, Q4. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the solar plexus. He wasn't a rising star in a prestigious Chicago residency. He was a crop. He was being grown, monitored, and pampered for the sole purpose of being dismantled to save a man who viewed the rest of the world as a hardware store. Caleb's fingers clamped onto the edge of the desk, the cold metal biting into his skin. He realized then that his entire existence, the long shifts, the perfect evaluations, the scholarship that had pulled his mother out of debt, was a medical resource for the politician. He was a 99% match for a dying man, a biological insurance policy wrapped in a white lab coat. The heavy security door at the end of the hall hissed, a hydraulic moan that echoed through the sterile corridor. Caleb's head snapped toward the sound. He didn't have much time. He fumbled for the thumb drive in his pocket, his movements frantic but precise. "Caleb, are you in there?" The voice was a whisper, urgent and sharp. Sarah Johnson slipped through the door, her oversized, friendly smile replaced by a mask of sheer terror. She didn't look like the nurse who brought him organic lunches and asked about his mother anymore. She looked like a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. "Caleb, stop," she hissed, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the server room. "You have to leave. Now." I saw the security feed upstairs. They've flagged an unauthorized entry in this sector. They know someone is in the biological inventory. Caleb didn't pull his hand back from the console. "They're going to kill me, Sarah. Did you know? Look at this." He pointed at the screen, at the word harvest. "I'm a match for Thorne. They've been prepping me for months." Sarah didn't look at the screen. She looked at the door. "I know more than you think. But if you don't move in the next 60 seconds, it won't matter what you found. The response team is already in the elevator. They've cut the stairwell access. You're trapped if you don't move." Caleb looked at the progress bar on the screen. "Copying." 88%. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his neck, cold and stinging. The room felt smaller, the walls of humming servers closing in like the jaws of a trap. He counted under his breath, 5, 6, 7. He needed those files. He needed the proof, or he was just a paranoid doctor who'd had a breakdown. 20 seconds, Sarah urged, her voice trembling. Caleb, please. The progress bar hit 100%. Caleb yanked the drive from the slot, the plastic casing warm against his palm. He stood up, but the door at the far end of the server bank didn't just open. It was thrown back with a violent metallic clang that rang through the room like a funeral bell. Michael Davis stepped into the light. The head of trauma didn't look like a healer. He looked like a man who had spent a lifetime burying secrets. Behind him, 2 security guards in charcoal gray tactical gear filled the doorway, their boots thudding rhythmically on the raised floor tiles. Dr. Miller, Davis said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that set Caleb's teeth on edge. You're out of your depth. Hand over the drive, and we can talk about this in my office. Caleb stepped back, his heel catching on a thick bundle of wires. I saw the files, Michael. I saw the residents in the basement. I saw my own name on a harvest list. You saw data you weren't trained to interpret, Davis replied, stepping closer. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace. You're a valuable part of this institution. Don't throw your career away for a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. You're farming people. The guards moved then, a synchronized blur of motion. Caleb didn't think. He reacted. He lunged for the crash cart parked near the diagnostic terminal. His hands found the heavy paddles of a defibrillator. As the first guard reached out to grab his arm, Caleb slammed the paddles together and triggered a burst of energy. A bright blue spark erupted with a sharp crack, and the guard collapsed, his muscles seizing as he hit the floor. Caleb didn't wait. He shoved the heavy cart with all his strength, sending it crashing into the second guard's shins. He bolted past Davis, who reached out a hand to stop him. Caleb felt the rough fabric of Davis's lab coat brush his arm, but he tore himself away, his heart thundering. 8, 9, 10. He burst through the door and into the main hallway, the sterile ozone scent of the institute replaced by the raw, metallic tang of his own fear. He ran. His sneakers squeaked on the polished linoleum, a frantic, high-pitched sound that seemed to echo for a mile. He didn't look back. He had the drive. He had the truth. But as he rounded the corner toward the staff elevators, he saw Sarah standing by the security station. She wasn't running. She was talking into a radio, her posture rigid, her face devoid of the warmth he had trusted for 3 years. Subject is in the North Corridor, she said, her voice flat and professional. He has the drive. Move to intercept. Caleb skidded to a halt, his chest heaving. Sarah? She turned to look at him. The cold, predatory light in her eyes made his stomach turn. I'm so sorry, Caleb, she said, the words falling from her lips like a practiced script. I'm so sorry. The realization was a second, deeper betrayal. She wasn't just a nurse who happened to be there. She was his keeper. Every organic meal she'd brought him, every time she'd insisted he take his vitamins or checked his blood pressure after a long shift. It was all quality control. She wasn't monitoring his health for his sake. She was ensuring the merchandise stayed pristine. She had been the primary architect of his cage, a jailer dressed in floral scrubs. How long? Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising wail of the facility's alarm. Since day one, she replied. You were always the most promising specimen. We couldn't risk you getting sick or injured before the senator was ready. Now please, make this easy. You're only going to hurt the assets if you struggle." Caleb turned and dove into the service stairwell. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted the steps as he descended, the sound of his own voice the only thing keeping him from screaming. He reached the ground floor and burst through the heavy glass doors into the parking lot. The night air was thick and humid, smelling of rain and asphalt. He fumbled for his keys, his eyes fixed on his silver sedan parked under the orange glow of a streetlight. He reached the car and jammed the key into the lock, but the handle didn't budge. He looked down. All 4 tires had been slashed, the rubber sagging like dead skin against the pavement. He pulled out his phone to call the police, but the screen showed a jagged line of static. A high-pitched whine vibrated in his inner ear. A signal jammer. They had turned the entire campus into a dead zone. He was trapped. The Sterling Heights Medical Institute sat on a hill, surrounded by 10 acres of manicured lawn and a 10-foot wrought iron fence. He looked at his watch. It was 6 p.m. His mandatory evening checkup, the one where they usually gave him a stress relief injection, was scheduled for midnight. He had 6 hours before they would come for him with a needle full of darkness. He couldn't stay in the open. He saw the sweep of headlights near the main gate. He ducked back toward the building, entering through the loading docks. He needed a place to hide, a place to think. He ran toward the locker rooms, hoping to find his bag, his wallet, anything that could help him get past the gate. He reached his locker and punched in the code. The door swung open with a hollow metallic groan. It was empty. His spare clothes, his medical books, even the framed photo of his mother, gone. In their place sat a single sheet of paper on a clipboard. Replacement pending, the bold red letters read. Below it, a signature from Human Resources. They had already erased him. To the world outside, Dr. Caleb Miller had already ceased to exist. "He's in the pharmacy wing," a voice barked from the hallway. Caleb scrambled toward the pharmacy, the smell of rubbing alcohol and peppermint thick in the air. He ducked behind a row of tall steel cabinets as a security team, led by a man with a jagged scar through his eyebrow, swept into the room. This was James Wilson, Thorne's personal enforcer. Caleb heard the rhythmic pop, pop, pop of Wilson cracking his knuckles. "Come out, Doc," Wilson called, his voice echoing off the tile walls. "You're making a mess of a very expensive schedule." Caleb's eyes darted around the shelves. He saw a row of pressurized oxygen canisters and a crate of industrial-strength cleaning chemicals. His mind, trained for crisis, began to calculate. He grabbed a heavy wrench from a maintenance kit on the counter. He cracked the valves on 3 oxygen tanks, the hissing sound like a nest of angry snakes. Then he smashed a gallon jug of ammonia and a bottle of bleach on the floor. The chemical reaction was instant. A thick, choking white cloud began to billow upward. "What the hell is that?" One of the guards coughed. Caleb took a deep breath, pulled his shirt over his nose, and heaved the wrench at the oxygen tanks. The metal struck metal. A spark flew, and the combination of pure oxygen and volatile fumes ignited in a flash of blinding white light and a roar of heat. It wasn't an explosion, but a sudden, violent expansion of gas and flame that filled the room with a deafening whoosh. In the chaos and the blinding white fog, Caleb lunged for the laundry chute set into the back wall. He threw himself into the dark opening, the cold stainless steel slick against his back as he plummeted into the bowels of the building. He hit a pile of soiled linens with a thud that knocked the wind from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, the smell of bleach and old blood thick in his nostrils. He was in the basement, the real basement, far below the public levels. The air here was colder, damp, and smelled of rot hidden behind a thin veil of lavender-scented detergent. He climbed out of the bin and looked around. This wasn't a hospital storage room. It was a ward. Behind heavy plexiglass walls, 3 figures lay in beds, hooked up to a forest of monitors and tubes. Caleb approached the first one. It was a young man, no older than 20, his skin a translucent, waxy yellow. Caleb looked at his chart. Thomas Brown, Asset 09. Left kidney harvested October 12th. Partial liver harvest scheduled November 15th. Asterisk. The man's eyes flickered open. He looked at Caleb, but there was no spark of recognition, only a profound, hollow exhaustion. He reached out a trembling hand and touched Caleb's sleeve. "I'm sorry," the man whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Doctor. I didn't mean to bleed on the sheets." Caleb felt a wave of nausea. This was the future they had planned for him. He wasn't just a donor for Thorne, he was a warehouse of parts. He looked at the other beds, a woman in her 30s, a teenager. All of them scholarship winners. All of them ghosts. He knew then that he couldn't just run. If he left, these people would be erased just as he was being erased. He had to break the system. He remembered the facility's blueprints from his orientation. The master control room for the environmental systems was just down the hall. He raced through the dark corridors, his heart counting out the rhythm of his resolve. 1, 2, 3. He reached the heavy steel door of the control hub. If he could trigger a level 4 biohazard alert, the building's safety protocols would take over. In the event of a lethal airborne leak, the system was designed to vent the entire facility and, more importantly, trigger a fail-safe open on all exterior locks to allow for mass evacuation. It was a smart move. It was the only move. He sat at the terminal, his fingers flying across the keys. He bypassed the local sensors and accessed the main ventilation array. "I can do this," he whispered to the empty room. "I can get everyone out." Subverted beat. Caleb's fingers danced over the keys, his mind a whirlwind of logic and desperation. He knew the Institute's architecture better than almost anyone. He'd spent his late-night shifts studying the schematics when he couldn't sleep. The emergency biohazard protocol was the nuclear option, a hardwired safety feature that even Sterling couldn't override without a physical key from the fire marshal. By releasing a harmless but pungent tracer gas into the ventilation and manually tripping the sensors, he would force the building to breathe. The massive fans would kick into overdrive, and every pressurized seal on every exit would snap open to prevent the staff from being trapped with a contaminant. It was the perfect plan. Confident, he initiated the sequence. He watched the screen as the command moved through the system. This would save the residents in the basement ward. It would save him. He felt a surge of adrenaline-fueled hope. He was outsmarting them. He was using their own high-tech cage to set himself free. He even began a global broadcast of the stolen dossier, slaving the upload to the alarm system so that every screen in the building would display Thorne's harvest list the moment the siren started. The fans began to roar. Far above him, the massive intake turbines groaned to life, a deep, vibrating thrum that Caleb felt in his marrow. On his monitor, green lights began to flicker. Ventilation override, active. Exit seals, releasing. Caleb exhaled, his shoulders finally dropping from his ears. He heard the distant, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the magnetic locks on the heavy doors upstairs, disengaging. He had won. He started toward the door, ready to lead the basement residents toward the service elevator. He could almost taste the fresh, unfiltered rain air of the Chicago night. He imagined the confusion of the guards as the doors swung wide, the public seeing the truth on every monitor in the lobby. But then, he stopped. The roar of the fans changed pitch. Instead of the steady, powerful drone of an exhaust cycle, the sound became a high-pitched, straining whine. Caleb turned back to the monitor. The green lights were gone. In their place, a single pulsing amber icon appeared. Protocol Amendment 12, B, Containment Priority. Caleb's brow furrowed. He tapped the keys, trying to pull up the sub-menu. His unease grew as he realized the system wasn't responding to his commands anymore. The high-pitched whine of the fans grew louder, more frantic. A strange, sweet smell, like rotting peaches, began to waft from the vents in the ceiling. This wasn't the tracer gas he had selected. The screen suddenly turned a blinding, bruised purple. Biohazard detected. Level 5. Full seal initiated. No, Caleb whispered. No, no, no. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't triggered an evacuation. He had triggered a quarantine. Sterling had updated the protocols months ago, a detail hidden in the fine print of the security manuals Caleb hadn't seen. In the event of a level 4 or higher biohazard, the Institute didn't open its doors. It sealed them with explosive bolts and secondary steel shutters to protect the investments of the elite from outside contamination. The clack, clack, clack he had heard wasn't the locks opening. It was the sound of heavy steel plates sliding into place over every window and door. He wasn't letting the world in. He was locking himself in a tomb. And the broadcast? The monitor showed the dossier being sent. But the destination wasn't the public internet. The system had intercepted the unauthorized transmission and rerouted it to a secure internal server. A new window popped up on the screen, a live feed from the lobby's news monitors. Breaking news. The anchor's voice echoed through the control room. A disgruntled employee at the Sterling Heights Medical Institute, Dr. Caleb Miller, has reportedly released a chemical agent inside the facility after being caught stealing high-grade narcotics. A full quarantine is in effect. Police warn that Miller is armed and extremely dangerous. Caleb fell back into the chair, his knees hitting the floor. He had given them exactly what they needed. He had provided the emergency that justified sealing the building and the crime that turned him from a whistleblower into a terrorist. He looked up at the vents, the sweet, sickly smell of the sedative gas filling his lungs. He had tried to be the hero, and in doing so, he had built his own gallows. The room began to spin. The rhythmic 1, 2, 3 in his head slowed, the numbers blurring into a single gray haze. He tried to stand, but his legs felt like they were made of water. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the security camera in the corner of the room, its red light blinking like a mocking eye. He woke up strapped to a gurney, the cold bite of leather restraints against his wrists and ankles. The ceiling tiles above him were a blinding, clinical white. He tried to move his head, but a padded brace held him still. 1, 2, 3, 4, a voice counted. Caleb's eyes shifted. Robert Thorne sat in a wheelchair by the bed, his skin like yellowed parchment, his skeletal fingers resting on a gold watch. He wasn't looking at Caleb. He was looking at the ceiling. 5, 6, Thorne continued, his lips barely moving. He finally lowered his gaze, his eyes cold and hollow. You have a very efficient heart, Dr. Miller. Strong, steady. It's a shame you tried to break it. You can't do this, Caleb rasped, his throat feeling like it had been scraped with glass. I can do anything I have the capital to support, Thorne replied, his voice a dry, melodic rattle. The world is just a collection of systems, Caleb. And systems require maintenance. Sometimes you have to replace a part to keep the machine running. You should understand that. You're a doctor. Arthur Sterling stepped into view, holding a tablet. He looked down at Caleb with a mixture of disappointment and clinical interest. The sedative will wear off in a few minutes, just in time for the prep. We've moved the harvest up. The senator had a setback during your little performance in the control room. My parents, Caleb choked out. They'll know. They'll find out. Sterling leaned in, his face inches from Caleb's. Your mother just received a notification that you've been accepted into a prestigious overseas research fellowship. She also received a very generous relocation grant that paid off her mortgage this morning. She's very proud of you, Caleb. She thinks you're saving the world. The cruelty of it was the final straw. They hadn't just stolen his life. They had bought his mother's silence with the blood money of his own death. Caleb felt a surge of cold, white-hot rage. He began to breathe faster, his chest heaving against the restraints. Don't struggle, Sterling said, turning toward the surgical droids. It only complicates the incision. Caleb didn't stop. He began to hyperventilate, forcing his lungs to pump air in short, jagged bursts. He wasn't just panicking, he was triggering a physiological response. He knew that if he could drive his CO2 levels low enough, he could induce a localized seizure. The surgical droids were programmed with extreme sensitivity. Any unexpected muscle spasm or spike in vitals would trigger an automatic safety shutdown to prevent accidental tissue damage. His vision began to tunnel. His hands started to twitch. He's crashing, a technician shouted. The monitors began to wail. The surgical droids, their many-jointed arms hovering over Caleb's chest with gleaming scalpels, suddenly froze. A red light flashed on the main console. Patient instability detected. System standby. In the confusion, Caleb used the momentum of his twitching limbs to strain against the leather. He felt the buckle on his left wrist slip. Sarah had tightened it, but she had always been so sorry about the bruising, leaving just a fraction of an inch of slack. He ripped his hand free, the leather tearing at his skin. He lunged for the tray of instruments next to the bed. His fingers closed around a preloaded syringe. He didn't look at the label. He knew the color. It was the paralytic they used for intubation. Sterling turned, his eyes wide, but Caleb was faster. He drove the needle into Sterling's neck and depressed the plunger. The doctor's eyes rolled back, his muscles going limp as the drug hit his system. He slumped to the floor like a discarded suit. Caleb scrambled off the gurney, his legs shaking. He didn't look at Thorne, who was staring at the ceiling again, counting tiles as if the chaos around him didn't exist. Caleb stumbled toward the emergency manual override, a physical lever behind a glass plate that he had memorized during a fire drill months ago. He smashed the glass with his elbow, the shards cutting his skin, and yanked the lever. A deep, grinding sound echoed through the ward as the liquid nitrogen vents opened, creating a thick, freezing fog that obscured the security cameras. He burst through the service doors and into the lobby. It was empty, the staff having been evacuated or retreated to the upper floors during the biohazard alert. He saw a young woman with blue hair sitting on a bench, clutching a tablet. She was staring at the steel shutters over the exit, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. Caleb lunged toward her. "I need that," he gasped, pointing to the tablet. Jennifer Martinez jumped, her body angling toward the door. "Who are you?" "The news said." "The news is lying," Caleb said, his voice raw. "Please, I have the files. If I don't get them out now, they'll kill me and everyone in the basement. Look at me. Do I look like a drug addict?" Jennifer looked at his blood-stained lab coat, his shaking hands, and the sheer, vibrating desperation in his eyes. She didn't say a word. She handed him the tablet. Caleb's fingers flew. He didn't try to send it to a news outlet this time. He opened a public social media app and hit Go Live. "My name is Dr. Caleb Miller," he said, holding the tablet up so the camera captured his face and the sterile, high-tech nightmare of the lobby behind him. "And I am currently being harvested by the Sterling Heights Medical Institute." He began to scroll through the dossier, the images of the basement residents, the genetic match charts, and the contracts signed by Senator Thorne. The view count began to climb. 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. The truth was leaking out into the world, a digital flood that no steel shutter could contain. 1, 2, 3, Caleb whispered, watching the upload bar hit 100%. The world is solid. 20 minutes later, the sound of sirens drowned out the hum of the facility. But they weren't the polite, muffled sirens of the Institute's private security. These were the screaming, multi-tonal wails of a dozen FBI and state police cruisers. Caleb sat on the curb in the pouring rain, the cold water washing the scent of ozone and bleach from his skin. He watched as agents in windbreakers swarmed the building, their flashlights cutting through the dark. He saw James Wilson being led out in handcuffs, his knuckles silent for once. He saw Sarah Johnson, her face a mask of blank, robotic neutrality, as she was pushed into the back of a car. But then, he saw a black SUV pull away from the rear of the building, escorted by a separate detail of men in suits. He caught a glimpse of the passenger through the tinted glass. It wasn't Thorne. It was a man he didn't recognize. Looking healthy, looking whole. A news report on a nearby officer's radio crackled to life. Senator Thorne's office has released a statement claiming the senator was a victim of the Institute's unauthorized experimental protocols and had no knowledge of the donor program. The senator is said to be recovering from a successful, legitimate transplant at an undisclosed location. The bitter truth settled in Caleb's gut. The system had sacrificed its limbs to save its head. The Institute was gone, the parts were disposed of. But the men who built the machine were already buying a new one. 6 months later, the air in the Oregon woods smelled of damp pine and wood smoke. It was a heavy, honest smell that didn't leave a metallic taste on the tongue. Caleb Miller, now David Miller, stood at the front of a small community center, demonstrating how to tie a tourniquet to a group of local hikers. "Remember," he said, his voice steady, "the goal is to stop the clock. You're not fixing the problem, you're buying time." He looked down at his hands. They didn't shake anymore. He looked at the exit, a simple wooden door that led out to a gravel parking lot and a wall of ancient Douglas firs. He counted the steps to the door. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He was a ghost now, a man without a face living in the shadows of a world that still looked for perfection in the bodies of the disposable. He knew they were still out there, the men with the gold watches and the sharp suits, shopping for a longer life. But as he watched the hikers practice their nuts, he felt the solid ground beneath his feet. He had saved himself. He had saved a few others. And for now, in the quiet twilight of the forest, the count was enough.